You might have heard some things about a Dyson sphere lately. What's up with that?
There's a new study that may suggest we are not alone.
A group of researchers say they've identified at least 7 stars that might be surrounded by super advanced alien megastructures known as Dyson spheres.
What if someday we could build a superstructure so big we could basically surround our sun and capture its energy directly?
最近有一篇研究暗示，我们人类在宇宙中可能并不孤单。一个研究团队称，他们发现了7颗恒星，可能被超级先进的外星巨型结构包围。是的，我说的是外星结构。你知道这将意味着什么？基本想法是这样的：外星人或超级智慧生命可能会在他们的恒星或行星周围建造大型结构，用来收集或再利用能量。这些发现到底意味着什么呢？如果真有戴森球存在，甚至还有好几个，那外星文明得有多聪明才能完成如此复杂的工程啊？这个想法是1960年由一位物理学家提出的。如果这些结构存在，它们会产生大量的红外线辐射，这样地球上的科学家就能被侦测到。研究人员说，他们发现了7个红外线辐射源，但无法找到这些辐射源如此明亮的明显解释。这可能意味着它们是外星结构，也可能是其他完全不同的东西。说实在话，这真的是太疯狂了。我们真的希望能更好地理解它。首先，让天体物理学家《黑洞生存指南》一书作者哥伦比亚大学物理与天文学教授来给我们简单解释了一下。
So how do you explain Dyson spheres?
I think there was an excellent explanation. If you look at where we are relative to the sun, we're very far away. We're the 3rd planet in. And imagine the light that we try to collect, let's say, with solar panels on people's homes or on any roofs to collect that energy. Imagine if you got really close and you caught everything the sun was emitting. It's just a tremendous amount of power. And so Freeman Dyson was thinking about this. Actually, he was originally inspired by sci-fi, written by Olaf Stapleton, like decades earlier. And his idea wasn't so much a solid sphere. It was really like satellites in orbit, a network of things that would be orbiting and would essentially, what we would now say, have solar panels and are collecting that energy.
That these are the elusive Dyson spheres?
So I think it's very unlikely, but I'm open. We have to be open as scientists. If we think we know the answer before we go and observe, then we're already defeated. I think it's terribly unlikely, but it's extremely exciting and interesting to think about. And it's fun to think about. What's probably going to happen is we're going to look at this infrared signature that you mentioned, and we're going to find out that there's a natural cause. So a lot of things emit heat in the infrared. You know, infrared goggles allow us to see human bodies and the heat of human bodies. And it's not that dissimilar that when we look in the infrared, we see things emitting heat. So the idea was if we had this very technologically advanced civilization, like thousands of years beyond where we are right now, and they could build such a thing and it was collecting all this energy, it would collect also some heat and would have to cool off, and we would see that in the infrared. But there are other natural possibilities that could explain.
What do you think those possibly could be?
Well, it could be a very young star that still has some material around it in kind of a disk, and that's how planets form. Planets coalesce out of these early disks, and those can emit in the infrared. It could be that there's actually an entire galaxy in the distance behind the star, and we're seeing that galaxy, and we can't disambiguate those. Or it could be planetary collisions. I mean, there are natural explanations. But I think it's worth noting, we're looking just 1,000 light years around us. That sounds far, but it's actually really close. That's our backyard. The entire Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years across. And there are probably more planets in the Milky Way galaxy than there are stars. So we're talking of hundreds of billions and maybe trillions of planets out there. And I think we're in an era where we think the emergence of life is possibly inevitable elsewhere, that we're not the only example. Now, whether or not they've survived with thousands of years of industrial advancement to build a Dyson sphere is a different story.
Yeah. Do you think there is a scenario where a Dyson sphere might actually exist, or do you think this is really just the stuff of sci-fi fantasy?
I think it's feasible, unlikely. If you look at where we are since the Industrial Revolution, it's only a couple hundred years. We're in a precarious position. We have climate change. We have struggles with nuclear power, nuclear weapons that are could be destructive. It's unclear that any species that makes it that advanced could survive far enough into their own future to be able to build a Dyson sphere. But there are optimists out there who say we'll find a way.
Yeah, right.
著名物理学家加莱道雄对这一新发现表示说
Well, two groups of astronomers, as you pointed out, they've identified about 60 candidates for type 2 Dyson spheres. Now, how do you do that? By looking for infrared signatures. Stars usually blast out a tremendous amount of visible light that lights up the night sky. Infrared radiation is pretty much invisible, but it's a byproduct of heat. And so the heat generated by the star would eventually heat up the Dyson sphere. The Dyson sphere itself starts to heat up to emit infrared radiation. And bingo, by looking at the galaxy, we have found about 60 candidates emitting infrared radiation. So who knows? Maybe there's another Star Trek Enterprise out there wondering whether or not they should visit the planet Earth, or are we too backward?
科学家是否在恒星周围发现了戴森球？著名物理学家尼尔德格拉斯泰森从我们眼中的外星文明卡尔达肖夫等级来探索了这样的文明可能拥有的如戴森球科技和对宇宙的新理解。泰森从卡尔达舍夫文明的概念及其3个不同的级别，并探讨了其在能量利用上的进展及其戴森球科技的可能性。
There's something called a Kardashev civilization, named for Nikolai Kardashev. He was an astrophysicist. If you look at the history of what we call great civilizations, one of the things that distinguishes them is their capacity to generate and consume energy. And so if that's the case, you can think of levels of civilization based on how much energy they consume. And thus was born the Kardashev scale. A civilization that's level 1 on this Kardashev scale has the power to harness the energy of its home planet. And that's extraordinary when you think about what that involves. On our home planet, there's the energy of volcanoes, of tornadoes, of hurricanes, and of earthquakes. This is Earth exhibiting a display of energy that typically we run from or die from. If we could control all of that, that would be an extraordinary state of our civilization. Tapping a volcano of its energy so that you now can use that energy to run the city that the exploding volcano would have otherwise leveled. So we're not there yet, but that would be a civilization type 1. Civilization type 2 on a Kardashev scale is, well, what else is generating energy out there? Well, our host star, the sun. So imagine we had total control over the sun's energy. Right now, we just set up a few solar panels here and there, and it's, whatever energy happens to get there on a clear day and not at night, that we're tapping some of the energy of the sun. But the sun is emitting energy in every single direction in space. So imagine you could harness all of that energy. That's vastly more energy than is contained in the Earth. That would be a civilization of extraordinary power. Would they have warp drives, wormholes? Who knows? They'd be traveling across the galaxy, between galaxies, because the energy is so plentiful and they have access to it and especially can control it. It's a big factor when you have access to awesome supplies of energy. That would be scale 2. 3 on the Kardashev scale would be you can control all the energy of all the stars in your galaxy. So our galaxy, the Milky Way, has several 100 billion stars. So if you found some way to harness all of that oh my gosh, this is, I mean, who can imagine what that is? Can you create universes? Who knows? I don't know. I can't think that far ahead. What I do know is that it would be awesomely dangerous, as any new access to energy has always become when in the hands of bad actors on the geopolitical stage. So what this has done is enabled some people, some colleagues of mine, to say, if there's a civilization type 2 controlling all the energy of its host star, would we be able to see that in our data? There's so much data now available with many telescopes that has observational and spectroscopic data of billions of stars. Billions. We have observational data on billions of stars in the universe, not only in our galaxy, but other galaxies. And so if there was a type 2 civilization, could you detect it? What would it look like? Well, a couple of things. If you're looking at invisible light, the kind of light that the sun primarily gives off, they would be blocking that light to absorb that energy for their needs. So you would see an ordinary star just begin to disappear as they built structures around it to absorb that energy. There's an interesting fact here. Well, there's no such thing as a free lunch in the universe. You can't just take the sun's energy and then have the energy disappear. It manifests in other ways. You know, it manifests as heat. Heat. You know this intuitively, even if you've never thought about it. If you have an internal combustion engine car, the kind with pistons, right? You put in gasoline, that gasoline burns via pistons and spark plugs and all the right to move the car forward, and the engine gets hot. Your use of that energy not only propels your car forward, but also turns into heat. If there's a civilization that managed to completely enclose its host star, it would get rid of all the visible light, because that's high quality energy that it's using. It takes that light through the solar panels. The star would slowly disappear from a, quote, a regular looking star and would ultimately appear as a red glow in your infrared telescopes. So there was a recent study in a peer-reviewed journal, the Monthly Notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, one of the more respected journals in the world, of a study that's just simply looking for these red glowing blobs in the galaxy, in the pre-existing data that's already out there. Didn't even have to design a telescope for this. The telescopes are already bringing in the data. They're just asking a different question on those images. So out of a sample of millions of stars, they found 7 candidates that might be one of these type 2 civilizations. Or it could be some gas cloud that was warmed up and is radiating infrared. So, of course, the press loves aliens. If your first guess is, there's an alien civilization that's making this infrared, the press will talk about the work. If it's, well, it could be gas clouds that have been warmed with dust in them that have been warmed by this energy that's been radiated, and it's masquerading as what could be a type 2 civilization. You can't rule that out either. As a scientist, just because you don't fully understand what you observed, it doesn't mean aliens did it. That shouldn't be anyone's first guess. The universe brims with mysteries and physical phenomenon we're still discovering. And so, yeah, I tend to be a little more conservative about that. A friend of mine died a few years ago, Freeman Dyson, brilliant physicist. He came up with the idea of an entire sphere. So a Kardashev civilization type 2, they just simply have control over all of the energy of their host star. One way to do that is to build a sphere around it that completely encloses that star. So no energy escapes your detectors, your panels. It just needs to have the power to tap that energy for whenever it needed it for whatever purpose. And you can imagine strips of panels. It wouldn't have to be the entire, let some energy get out If you needed it, maybe those panels can close up and open again, like those stadiums that open and close in the rain or in the hot sun. And there's no telling what inventions, what discoveries, what new understandings of the universe would unfold in those civilizations versus ours, a type 0 civilization. So that's what's up, in case you were wondering. The long and short of what it is to harness energy that's all around us. Till next time, keep looking up.